I want to talk some more about this kind of mind-blowing phone call that I had with my 21-year-old yesterday. Keep in mind, she's a poli-sci major in pre-law. So a lot of our phone conversations when she calls me from college have to do with politics. And right now, for non-Western poli-sci, she's reading a lot of Frantz Fanon, right? Black Skin, White Masks, A Dying Colonialism. These are books written in the 1950s and 60s, but they're still really important works. And while I might not personally agree with all of the things that Fanon advocated for, I totally agree with her that it's worth being enamored with his literature and spending some time really digging into the concepts that he discusses. So she and I were having this conversation where she was saying that she thinks too many Americans don't understand that there is no one grand gesture that's going to fix this. Too many Americans are thinking that we're just going to vote Democratic in the midterms and this will all go away. And I would argue, yes, I agree with her. I would argue that it is Democratic establishment leadership that is pushing that narrative. It's the Chuck Schumers and the Hakeem Jeffries that are pushing that narrative because they are totally underestimating the moment that we're in. They don't understand that this is fascism rising in this country. They think that this is politics as usual. Still worth calling your senators every single day and demanding that Chuck Schumer be removed from leadership. He is wholly inadequate for this moment in time. We need, 10 Democratic senators who are willing to demand a vote for new leadership. And we absolutely should have somebody else in charge of the Senate Dems after the humiliation, embarrassment of the 6 surrender Dems. Democrats in the Senate need new leadership. Worth calling every day. Take 3 minutes, call your Democratic senators every single day. You can do it. I promise you, it's important. Those calls matter. If they get 1,000, 1,500 calls a week about this, they're gonna listen to you. But I think much of this is driven by the Democratic establishment, right? Neoliberal types who don't really want to overturn the system, but also your average American who doesn't understand because the Republicans have done so much to erode education. We don't really know history. We don't know resistance history, which is why I think everybody should follow Tad Sturmer, right? One of my favorite accounts on social media. I learn so much from him. My kids are also big fans, Tad. If you're watching this, my kids are big fans. My 17-year-old who wants to be a history major, very much inspired by your work. So B and I are talking about this issue of underestimating the moment, believing that one grand gesture will fix all of this. She's talking about Fanon, she's talking about Gandhi, she's talking about all of these folks in history who led resistance movements. And we tend to read a blurb about them in history class and think that they did this thing and they overturned a fascist state or they ended imperialist rule. She's like, I didn't understand until I became a poli-sci major and really got invested in reading about these movements that these people spent decades, sometimes their entire life. So many of them were willing to engage in this work, knowing that they would never see the end result of it, right? It's that old proverb, blessed is he who plants the seed of a tree under whose shade he will never sit. And of course, as a poli-sci major, she's advocating for people to learn about these movements in their entirety and to understand how many years that these countries spent wrestling, sometimes generations that people spent wrestling, and how it's really not linear. There is some forward movement and then there is clamping down by the regime, and that it's this back and forth, it's this ebb and flow. I mean, look at the civil rights movement in the United States, how much work was done and how much SCOTUS is doing right now to dismantle those advancements in civil rights, how much they are working their hardest to completely dismantle the Voting Rights Act. Look at Donald Trump and the Republicans, white Christian nationalists who are dismantling DEI. Look at how many pillars of support, Target, Home Depot, Lowe's, universities like Columbia that have done away with their DEI policies basically on day one in order to bend the knee to fascism, how much they are working to erode and dismantle civil rights. That is a fight that is not one and done. The defense of democracy is never one and done. It is an ongoing struggle. And I think too many Americans, we didn't understand that. We were very complacent, and we also really want instant gratification. And I think too many Americans are still falling for that misperception of the reality of what it takes to defend a democracy. We have to use our rights or we lose them. I am somebody who thinks that voting should be compulsory in the United States. I know that Jean agrees with me. I've seen a number of other creators be like, we should have compulsory voting in the US. I know that they do in a lot of other countries, and it makes no sense to me that we make it so hard for people to vote. Why is Election Day not a national holiday? Okay, it does. It makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense to me because white men in power They don't want other folks to be able to vote. They want to make it as difficult as possible. But if we want to have a true democracy, then if we really want people to be able to have representation in government, then why is it that we don't have compulsory voting? Because too many Americans are real lax and won't show up and vote. Look at how low turnout is in off-year elections. We all need to be super voters voting in every election. We also need to understand that the defense of democracy is not constrained to electoral politics. It's not constrained to us just showing up and voting once a year. So as my kid was describing the kind of work that people do, knowing they may not live to see the results, but understanding that is really worthy work on behalf of human rights, on behalf of democracy, on behalf of ending imperialist rule or fascist rule. Right before she and I had this conversation, I saw a video from Tad Sturmer who was talking about how Americans are not thinking about what comes after. He was referencing, I believe, how Donald Trump is clearly in ill health. He's falling asleep in meeting after meeting in the middle of the day. And too many Americans are just excited for that day we're all going to party, and they're not thinking about what comes afterward. And I think that ties in very much to some of the other videos that I've made today saying, what's our strategy? What's our long game? What's our game plan? Because Republicans had a plan that they started enacting in like the 1980s, right? The Heritage Foundation and white Christian nationalist Republicans, like that, this has been a slow roll for them. They have been content to play slow and steady wins the race. And we're over here being the like grand gesture, show up for the midterms and pretend it's all going to end. And we need some realistic understanding about how it is a long game and it is concerted pushing. It's concerted chiseling away at the pillars of support, right? We're content to nick off little by little by little, all those little specks of dust, all those little chunks of rock until those pillars crumble. There's no just like running up and being like kapow and it all falls apart. And likewise, what happens after it all falls apart? I think that's what Tad was really trying to get at in his video. Now, he was talking about the threat of J.D. Vance and how he thinks J.D. Vance is more sophisticated than people give him credit for, which is very different than like Knitting Cult Lady's take, which is that J.D. Vance can't command the cult of MAGA, and he's very, very uncharismatic. The people won't be behind him. And I'm still thinking about how I feel about that. I'm listening to those different perspectives. But where I do 100% agree with Tad is that we don't really have a plan for what comes after. On one hand, we have to visualize the kind of America that we want to create. Is that a populist America? Is that an America for the working class? That's why I'm always asking my audience, what kind of reforms do you want? What is the America that you want to live in? What would we have? What would give you a good quality of life? What would be ethical and just? What is it that we all deserve? I think it's so important to constantly be having that conversation and visualizing what we want to work toward. But there's the like big picture vision, and then there's the nuts and bolts. There's the planning. There's the strategy. What's the Democratic Party's strategy? What's their strategy beyond vote them out in the midterms? Get rid of the Republicans in the midterms, and this will all go back to normal. And definitely in 2028, it'll definitely go back to normal. I don't know that Donald Trump is going to last until 2028. I don't know that democracy is going to last until the midterms. And I think in the aftermath of the midterms, especially with this Texas gerrymandering ruling from SCOTUS, I think what we're going to see is that if Democrats do win, Donald Trump and the Republicans are going to try a classic fascist technique of saying that the results are not accurate and that the Republicans just get to stay in power. Very, very classic move by autocrats to just cast aside the will of the people, to cast aside the votes of the American people and continue to do whatever they want. What's our plan when that happens? What is our plan for after Donald Trump, because he's a very old, frail man, after he expires, if J.D. Vance comes in and takes over? What is our plan? Tad is absolutely right. Too few Americans are thinking about it. Too few of those with power are actually strategizing for what comes after. What comes after an old man expires? What comes after the midterms when the fascists don't want to give up their power? What comes after the 2028 elections? We've got to wake up to the reality that this is not going to be over anytime soon, and we may likely be working for the remainder of our lifetimes to fix this mess and to work to build an America where the working class has a good quality of life, where we are not ruled by the kleptocrats, by the oligarchs, and that is good and worthy work. That is important work. It's okay if we don't have instant gratification. It's okay if all of this isn't over soon. Look at other movements throughout history. Look how long they struggled and how worthy that struggle was. what comes next? How do we plan for what comes next? And how do we not just plan to react to, but to drive and to shape what happens next? This is why I'm always saying the future doesn't belong to Donald Trump. It can belong to us. But that requires us to organize and to implement plans to shape the future that we deserve.